All right, today we're going to read chapters 14 through 16 of The Tiger Rising. Yesterday we found out that Sistine and Rob decided to go through the woods to see the tiger, and about halfway through the woods, Sistine started to ask Rob about his mom, and he didn't want to tell her, and she got really upset and decided to turn and walk away. And finally, Rob chased her down and admitted that his mom had died, and he started to open up to her. So that was kind of a big moment in the story where he's starting to develop a pretty strong friendship with Sistine here. The cage was made out of rusted chain link fence, and there was a wood board that served as a roof, and there was a chain link door that was locked tight with 3 padlocks. Inside the cage, the tiger was still pacing back and forth, just as he had the last time Rob had seen him, as if he had never stopped pacing, or as if Rob had never gone away. "Oh," said Sistine in the same voice she had used when she saw Rob's carvings. "He's beautiful." "Don't get too close," Rob ordered. "He might not like it if you stand too close." But the tiger ignored them. He concentrated on pacing. He was so enormous and bright that it was hard to look directly at him. "It's just like the poem says," Sistine breathed. "What?" Rob said. "That poem, the one that goes, 'Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night.' That poem, it's just like that. He burns bright." "Oh," said Rob, and he nodded. He liked the fierce and beautiful way the words sounded. Just as he was getting ready to ask Sistine to say them again, she whirled around and faced him. "What's he doing way out here?" she demanded. Rob shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "He's Mr. Beauchamps, I guess." "Beauchamps what?" said Sistine. "His pet?" "I don't know," said Rob. "I just like looking at him. Maybe Beauchamp does too. Maybe he just likes to come out here and look at him." "That's selfish," said Sistine. Rob shrugged. "This isn't right for this tiger to be in a cage. It's just not right." "We can't do nothing about it," Rob said. "We could if we let him go," said Sistine. "We could set him free." She put her hands on her hips. It was a gesture that Rob had already come to recognize and be wary of. "We can't," he said. "There's all those locks." "We can saw through them." "Nah," said Rob. The mere thought of letting the tiger go made his legs itch like crazy. "We have to set him free," Sistine said, her voice loud and certain. "Nuh-uh," said Rob. "It ain't our tiger to let go." "It's our tiger to save," Sistine said fiercely. The tiger stopped pacing. He pricked his ears back and forth, looking somewhere past Sistine and Rob. "Shh," Rob said. The tiger cocked his head, and all 3 of them listened. "It's a car," said Rob. "A car's coming. It's Mr. Beauchamp. We've got to go. Come on." He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the woods, and she ran with him. She let him hold on to her hand. It was impossibly small and bony and as delicate as the skeleton of a baby bird. They ran together, and Rob felt his heart move inside him, not from fear or exertion, but from something else. It was as if his soul had grown and was pushing everything up higher in his body. It was an oddly familiar feeling, but he just couldn't remember what it was called. "Is he behind us?" Sistine asked breathlessly. Rob shrugged. It was hard to move his shoulders up and down and keep a hold of Sistine's hand at the same time. Sistine said, "Stop shrugging your shoulders at me. I hate it. I hate the way you shrug all the time." That made Rob remember Willie Mae saying that when he shrugged, he looked like a skinny bird trying to fly. It struck him how funny that was now. He laughed out loud at the thought of it. And without asking him what he was laughing about, without dropping his hand, without stopping, Sistine laughed too. Then Rob remembered the name of the feeling that was pushing up inside him, filling him to full, to overflowing. It was called happiness. This was what it was called. Chapter 15. By the time they made it back to the motel parking lot, it was dark outside, and they were both laughing so hard they could barely walk. "Rob," said his father. He was standing at the door to their room. The blue-gray light from inside seeped out all around him. Yes, sir, said Rob. He dropped Sistine's hand and he stood up straight. Where you been? Out in the woods. Did you finish up all them jobs I told you to do? Yes, sir, said Rob. Who you got there with you? His father said, squinting into the darkness. Sistine drew herself up tall. This is Sistine, said Rob. Uh-huh, said his father, still squinting. You live around here? He asked. For now, said Sistine. Your parents know you're out here? I was going to call my mother, said Sistine. There's a payphone down in the laundry room, said Rob's father. In the laundry room? Sistine repeated, her voice full of disbelief. She put her hands on her hips. We don't got a phone in our room, Rob said to her softly. Good grief, said Sistine. Well, can I at least have some change to make the call? Rob's father reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a handful of quarters. He balanced the money in the palm of his hand as if he were preparing to do a magic trick, and Rob stepped forward and took the coins from his hand and handed them to Sistine. You want me to go with you? He asked her. No, she said. I'll find it. Thank you very much. Rob, said his father as Sistine marched away, swinging her arms. What's that girl doing in your clothes? She had on a dress, Rob said. It was too pretty to wear out in the woods. Come on in here, his father commanded. Let's get that medicine on your legs. Yes, sir, said Rob, and he walked toward the room slowly. His happiness had evaporated. His legs itched, and the motel room he knew would be as dank as a cave, lit only by the gray light of the television. When his mother was alive, the world had been full of light. The Christmas before she had died, she had strung the outside of their house in Jacksonville with hundreds of white lights. Every night the house lit up like a constellation, and they were all inside it together, the three of them, and they were happy. Rob remembered, and as he remembered, he stepped into the motel room, and he shook his head and scolded himself for opening up his emotional suitcase. Just thinking about all the things that were gone now seemed to make the darkness even darker. All right, one more chapter. Chapter 16. Rob sat out on the curb in front of the motel room and waited for Sistine to come back from using the phone. He had her green dress wrapped up in a grocery bag. He had tried to fold the dress up neatly, but folding a dress turned out to be an impossible task, and he finally gave up. Now he held the bag out and away from him so that the grease from the medicine on his legs would not stain it. He was relieved when Sistine finally walked toward him out of the darkness. Hey, he said. Hi. She sat down on the steps next to him. How come you don't have a phone? Rob shrugged. Ain't got nobody to call, I guess. My mother's coming to pick me up, Sistine said. Rob nodded. Here's your dress, and he handed her the bag. Sistine took it and then tilted her head to look up at the sky. Rob looked up too. The clouds had shifted, and there was clear patches where the stars shone through. I can see the Big Dipper, said Sistine. I like looking up at things. So do my mom and dad. That's how they met. They were both looking up at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and they weren't watching where they were going, and they bumped into each other. That's why my name is Sistine. I like your name, said Rob shyly. I've seen the Sistine ceiling too, she said. They took me last year, before Bridget, when they were still in love. Does it look like it does in the pictures? Rob asked. Better, said Sistine. It's like, I don't know, it's like looking at fireworks, kind of. Oh, said Rob. Maybe we could go to Italy sometime, and I could show you. That would be all right, said Rob, and he smiled into the darkness. That tiger can't look up at the stars, said Sistine, her voice getting hard. He's got that piece of wood over his head. He can't look up at all. We've got to let him go. Rob was silent. He was hoping if he didn't answer her, she might go back to talking about the Sistine ceiling again. How did your mother die? She asked suddenly. Rob sighed. He knew there was no point in trying not to answer. Cancer, he said. What was her name? I ain't supposed to talk about her, said Rob, closing his eyes to the stars and concentrating instead on his suitcase, working hard to keep it closed. "Why not?" asked Sistine. "Because my dad says it don't do no good to talk about it. He says she's gone and she ain't coming back. That's why we moved from Jacksonville, because everybody always wanted to talk about her. We moved down here to get on with our lives." There was a crunch of gravel, and Rob opened his eyes in time to see the headlight of a car sweep over them. "That's my mother," said Sistine, and she stood up. "Quick," she said, "tell me your mother's name." Rob shook his head. "Say it," she demanded. "Caroline," Rob said softly, cracking his suitcase open and letting the word slip out. Sistine gave him another businesslike nod of her head. "Okay," she said, "I'll come back tomorrow, and we'll make our plans for letting that tiger go." "Sissy," a voice called out, "baby, what in the world are you doing out here?" Sistine's mother got out of the car and came walking toward them. She had on high heels, and she wobbled as she walked in the gravel parking lot of the Kentucky Star. Her hair was a lighter shade of yellow than Sistine's and piled up high on her head. When she turned her head, Rob recognized Sistine's profile, her sharp chin and pointed nose, but the mouth was different, tighter. "Good Lord," said Mrs. Bailey to Sistine, "what have you got going on?" Or, "what have you got on?" "Clothes," said Sistine. "Sissy, you look like a hobo. Get in the car." She tapped her high heel foot on the gravel. Sistine didn't move. She stood beside Rob. "Well," said her mother when Sistine didn't move, "you must be Rob. What's your last name, Rob?" "Horton," said Rob. "Horton," said Mrs. Bailey. "Horton. Are you related to Shelton Horton, the congressman?" "No, ma'am," said Rob. "I don't think so." Mrs. Bailey's eyes flicked away from him and back to Sistine. "Baby," said Mrs. Bailey, "please get in the car." When Sistine still didn't move, Mrs. Bailey sighed and looked back at Rob again. "She won't listen to a word I say," Mrs. Bailey told him. "Her father is the only one she'll listen to." And then, under her breath, she muttered, "Her father, the liar." Sistine growled somewhere deep in her throat and stalked to the car and got in and slammed the door. "You're the liar," she shouted from the back seat of the car. "You're the one who lies." "Sweet Jesus," said Mrs. Bailey. She shook her head and turned and walked back to the car without saying anything else to Rob. Rob watched them pull away, and he could see Sistine sitting in the back seat. Her shoulders were slumped. A motel room door slammed. Somebody laughed. A dog barked once, short and high, and then stopped. And then there was silence. "Caroline," Rob whispered into the darkness. "Caroline, Caroline, Caroline." The word was sweet and forbidden like candy on his tongue. All right, that is it for today.